Namaste. Welcome to our 66th Gita talk. We're in the 14th chapter called the Yoga of the Division of the Three Gunas. That is, the energy, three modes of energy behavior, which of course involve consciousness because there is nothing but consciousness. Energy is a manifestation or a concept or even a dream of consciousness, whichever way you want to put it is. It's all right. It's kind of incomprehensible to us at this point. So the three gunas, qualities, modes of being, there's sattvic behavior, there's sattvic thought, there's sattvic attitude, for example. So it is. All right. So they've talked about where sattva arises from, but the truth is, I think it's backwards. Those things arise from sattva, or arise from tamas, arise from rajas. In fact, let me read this. All right. Of these, sattva is stainless, luminous, and health-giving. It binds by attachment to happiness and by attachment to knowledge. But I think sattva gives rise to a luminous state of mind. Obviously it would. And health-giving, not just in the sense of physical health, but also mental health, but also the mind interacts with the body. There's a connection, and there's also a kind of identity. So this will happen. And in Rajas, says raga, it's intense desire. So Rajas causes that. Tamas says is born of ignorance, deluding all embodied ones, but really Tamas creates ignorance. It doesn't just come from ignorance. In fact, again, I think that's rather silly. Ignorance comes from a state of being in tamas. If you don't have a tamasic mind, and by ignorance, they don't mean, say, illiteracy and so on. They mean just not catching on to what's happening around them in life and, of course, about themselves. So that's the Bhagavad Gita as I would have rephrased it. And considering how flexible Sanskrit can be, though precise, this may also be a possible literal, my idea may be a very literal translation. But this was comes from different sources. All right, ready. Sattva causes attachment to happiness. Now, all right, but see, sukha, to ease, to happiness, to balance, to harmony, all of those things, especially the state of mind and heart that we feel when there is this ease and this comfort and this happiness. Rajas causes attachment to action. We talked about the people that are, always have got to be fiddling and doing something, or, well, let's get out and I'm a doer and so on. And then Tamas, veiling knowledge, in other words, blinds us to it. It's mental blindness. And it veils knowledge and causes attachment to delusion, like being deluded. I've talked about, okay, you've got fake yoga, you've got fake gurus, you've got fake disciples. Disciples that have no intention of gaining any enlightenment. So they're either the kind that come to a true teacher and utterly misapply what he tells them, or they go and they find a fake guru and a phony yoga and they practice and they're happy as ducks in water because They are like ducks in water. They're in delusion. They're in Tamas. So they like it. So there are people that it doesn't matter how blatant a lie is, they will believe it. And because they're attached to delusion, they're attached to seeing it wrong. Now, there are nasty people that want to be indignant, they want to be offended. They wanted to say, well, I don't like that at all. And so they pretend. If you say it's day outside, they'll act like, well, you know, and they'll try to come up with something. I give you a classic example. I've given it before. Um, I was on the radio one time for an interview, and we're talking about reincarnation and karma. And I said that a lot of the people that are activists for civil rights, and I don't mean that they shouldn't have been, sure they should, and they were sincere, but a lot of people who are, a lot of Negro people active for civil rights were people that before had been a slave owner and had terribly misused and abused slaves. And to compensate for it, they had to come back and work against and campaign against and help remove the very conditions that they had caused. All right. So, of course, I get an indignant call. This isn't true that all Negroes were slave owners. Did I say that? No, I didn't say that. She knew I didn't say it. She wasn't stupid. Tamasic people are dumb and they often get the picture wrong. But she just wanted to be spiteful and say, yeah, because she hadn't done it to anybody else that day. So she had to call on her phone and do it. See? Not being Tamasic, I could detect it. So then, Sattva prevails over Rajas and Tamas. In other words, it can overcome them. It can put them in abeyance. It can, in a sense, put them out of mind and out of function. And Rajas prevails over Sattva and Tamas prevails over Sattva and Rajas. In other words, no guna is subordinate. They're really kind of here side by side. And then as we foster them in us, then they begin to be above, low, and lowest, and lower, and so on. And this is very important to realize. In other words, Sattva can dominate the other two gunas, Rajas can dominate the other two gunas, and Tamas can. So they have equal ruling power, equal power of domination. This is important to note because you're also saying, well, if I vote for Sattva, I don't have to say, well, what am I going to do about Rajas and Tamas? Inherent, according to Krishna, is the power to put them in abeyance, control them, and even eliminate them. But sattvic as I am and spiritual as I am, and look at the heavens saying, oh, I know you're there, dear God. Rajas can strike me and I can decide to go be a gambler in Las Vegas. Or Tamas can strike me and I'll decide to just go out and join the people wandering the streets, asking for change from people, and going to institutions like the Salvation Army to have a place to sleep and something to eat. I can choose it. But the lesson is you choose which guna dominates in you by how you choose to think and how you choose to act, and what kind of environment you choose, and most of all, what kind of people you choose to associate with. So this is extremely important to realize that whatever guna is functioning mostly in you can be flipped around and changed to another guna. So constant japa, constant japa, constant japa, supported by continual daily meditation, ensures that sattva will prevail. When the light of knowledge shines in all the gates of the body, not just one or two, not having a blind spot anywhere, then it should be known that sattva is dominant. Not just saying, oh, I read a lot of spiritual books, so I'm sattvic. Oh, no, because there's how much more time in your life you're not reading books. What's that activity like then? What is that guna? Greed, activity, undertaking of actions, again, especially just compulsive. I got to do something. I got to be involved in a project. A lot of community service people are this way. They couldn't care less about people, but they sure do want to do something to cover up their inner discontent, as well, of course, the desire to control other people's lives by helping them. Yes. So, this compulsive action, you see, restlessness, whatever you're doing, you're making the mistake of talking about spiritual things in front of them. And so they're looking up, they're looking about where the wall meets the ceiling, or if you've got a picture on the wall. I have seen people studying other person's shoelaces intently so they could block out what was going on they didn't want to have any part of, and especially didn't want to have it affect them, lest the guna of that positive thing overcome their negative dominance, which they like. Darkness, not a clue. Inertia, not now. Heedlessness, just not aware of what's happening. And delusion, seeing falsely, misinterpreting totally. There are people that think that their friends are their enemies, and they think their enemies are their friends. There are people, what could be worse than addiction to nicotine, alcohol, and other drugs? And yet the addicts think, these help me function, these calm me down. And all of these things, or they give me insight. All of these things that are killing their brain cells, destroying their whole, like the respiratory system in the matter of cigarette smoking and cigars. Don't pretend that, that paper on cigarettes isn't what gives people lung cancer or emphysema. It's ridiculous. So that these are the delusions, you see. These arise when Tamas is dominant. And you can't even dynamite them out of it. So just say, well, there's different ways to see it. And you know what? Why do you even go back to speak with these people? Again, I looked around me when I woke up and realized that not the Dharma was the Dharma. And that I understood, in fact, I came alive with the knowledge meditation is essential for me. I have to meditate, I have to learn. When I woke up and read the Bhagavad Gita and began to realize I needed to learn to meditate and so on, and I started basic meditation, what happened? Well, Thomas dropped away, and I looked around at my entire life situation. Yes, the school I was going to, the town I was living in, the whole county and state I was living in, the people I encountered daily, and including my own family, whom I loved. I didn't dislike any of these elements. I didn't hate them. But I realized these people, these ways, they are dead, and their ways are deadening. I was like them. I woke up, and if I don't want to go back to sleep, I've got to get out of here. Though I'd never heard the principle, Yogananda was right when he said company is greater than willpower. You get out of that environment and you do it unless you don't want to live. I wanted to live, so I got out. And then, so I went to California where there were yogis, also where there were people who believed in metaphysics, people who believed in higher things. It was heavenly. I loved living in Los Angeles. Back outside, oh, LA's crazy. People in Southern California are nuts. Even the Northern California people see that. But it was really a great lunacy then, and I loved every bit. And then I crossed the wide ocean. We had a song, silly little ditty that we sang sometimes that says, "This is like heaven to me. I've crossed over Jordan," meaning the Jordan River, "into Canaan's fair land, and this is like heaven to me." And when I got to India, I would sing, "I've crossed the wide ocean to India's land, and this is like heaven to me." But that was inaccurate because it wasn't like heaven. It was heaven. So, from the hell of darkness, people forget the old so-called pagan idea of hell was a region under the earth, and it was just dark all the time, and nothing went on. People weren't suffering. There wasn't any fire. You were just in a state of stasis, which is a state of death. The moment the body stops changing, it dies. So then, so we talk about life and death is important. So when the embodied one dies, when Sattva is dominant, then he enters the stainless realms, what the Buddhists call the Pure Land, of the knowers of the highest. In other words, if it's pure total Sattva, you go to the realm where people, they may not be absolutely enlightened, but they're enlightened enough that they know they don't want to come back. And these are what I've mentioned, the tapalokas, and they do tapasya so as to not come down into this swamp anymore. Therefore, always cultivating sattva, we can be sure we'll attain sattva. Not a reward for loving God and Jesus and going to heaven. None of that nonsense. See, sattva is the quality of the heavenly worlds. And if you're a heavenly human being right now, well, you go to where heavenly beings live in the other world. It's just perfectly logical. Like goes to like. Dying in Rajas, he is born. Notice see the other and say he's born. When Sattva is dominant, then he enters the stainless realms. In other words, he rises there. Dying in Rajas, he's born. In other words, right back in the old rat race, amid those attached to action. So he does the same old thing, and then he dies that way, and he comes back that way, and he dies that way, and he comes back that way. Dying in Tamas, he's born from the wombs of the deluded. That is, either from really, truly intellectually deluded people, or people whose delusion is they're just like hogs living in the mud. And he's born among these kind of, oh, I don't know, you get me the kind. Or the kind that just wallow and they like it. They're utterly deluded. You could read, frankly, if you want to, you just read about it in American Southern writers as they depict the South, mostly, because they usually depict either rural South or very, very small town South, where everybody is just duh. Now, I love the little town I came from, but it was Tamasic to an extent. And I think I've told you about a cousin of mine who was a brilliant artist and therefore thought a weirdo. He didn't behave weird at all by anybody's standards, but he does that stuff. And when uh, uh, an aunt of mine told one of these people that my cousin had been commissioned to make a spatial sculpture for the entrance of the Oklahoma City Zoo, he said, well, what's he gonna do next? Like that was the most unbelievably outrageous thing in the world to do, to make a sculpture. It was beautiful too. But there you are. So they're born in people like that. They're born in Hog Lane. And and they love it. And you can't get them out of it. And there's do-gooders that go and they try to get them out of it, and they can't do it. As I say, they're like the friend of mine, very intelligent, who went to Kentucky, which I love as a state, but we have our Tamil gunas, and the one that he just built a new house. He was a young man. And she said, oh, what color are you going to paint it? I'm not going to paint it. Don't need to. It costs money. She said, but it would look so much better. He said, I don't live on the outside, I live on the inside. I don't care what it looks like. She said, but painting the wood preserves the wood and it keeps the house from developing problems, eventually decaying and coming apart. He said, well, if it does that, I'll just build me another one. This is Tom O'Guna. I hope people from Kentucky, if you're watching, you don't mind, but you're not realistic if you don't know they're there. And plenty of very intelligent people are there. After all, my family's from Kentucky. They were smart like me. But there you are, though. So there are the deluded, and people are born. I've known people whose families were furious if they studied any academic subjects. I really mean that. I knew a man who was persecuted because he took Latin in junior high school. His family wouldn't shut about studying Latin, right? I knew people who, just because they took higher mathematics, they were persecuted. Of course, hopefully, this convinced them to get out from those people and live like a human being, walk upright, not all bent over, mentally speaking. They say that the fruit of action performed well is sattvic and without fault. In other words, it won't bring you any harm. If a harm comes, a genuine harm, because unpleasantness can result from the tamasic who don't like what you've done. But if you do it in a sattvic and correct way, it will harm you, not harm you, won't harm anyone, can upset the tamasic, but it will be without fault, which means it'll be a faultless karma and produce, again, sattvic karma. But the fruit of rajas is pain. No matter how successful you are, no matter how you seem to have gained so much, you will suffer pain. Now, pain doesn't just mean, oh, agony. It means anxiety. It means unsureness, not feeling really utterly safe or utterly stable, and just feeling unease. Because you see, when you're of a certain higher level, you are ill at ease in a lower level. And there are people who still force themselves to live there, but they're unhappy. They're miserable. I mentioned the man that he literally shook like this all the time, chain smoked. Uh, he was unfortunately susceptible to the people. When he went to school, he was a genius, you see. And he should have been either a physics teacher or a physicist. But in school, he was the brain. Hey, brain. Oh, he's the brain. You can tell I grew up with people like that, can't you? I can relay it to you well. The brain. Oh, yeah. So we thought, I want these people to respect me. Now, that was Tamas of him. Because why do you want a bunch of hogs, and they were hogs, to respect you? But he thought, I'll see them, teach them. When I go back, then they'll say, oh boy, Joe, wow, just think. So Joe went to Hollywood. Joe thought he'd become a big producer. He didn't. He became an associate producer, which, as his daughter explained, uh, brings snacks and drinks to the producer. And so there he was, utterly, he hated Hollywood. He hated the movies. He hated everybody in the movies, the actors, everybody. So he was miserable. That's why he shook. It was nothing neurological. And so there he was, totally miserable. And because his daughter, my friend, wanted to meditate, and she said, I want to get out of this place. I want to get off this wheel of birth and death. You know, he would say, I want to sell everything. But he was half sitting on his TV set, shaking and smoking. And when she said, Joe, because can you believe it? She and her brother called their parents by their first names. I told that to some Indian friends. They said, no, you've misunderstood. That could never take place because in India, that'd be unthinkable. And frankly, in any civilized environment, including in America, that should be unthinkable. But she said, Joe, what has this ever done for you? God became angry, shook there and said, why, it's made me very happy. There you were. What can you do? Sitting there was his wife. He hated her. She hated him. She thought she was a psychologist, and but spent her time usually getting drunk with her best friend in the back room of all places, a health food store. So there you were, nicotine addict, alcohol addict, but very happy. Yes, indeed. So, and so there, the fruit of Thomas sin is ignorance. Besides pain, just not knowing, not understanding, and there are people who do live in utter bewilderment, and they are really miserable people, but they can't figure out anything. Part of it's because IQ wise they can't, but the other is they just somehow can't see. And it's sad. You see, none of these people should be despised. None of these people should be looked down on. Uh, it's the condition that is terrible, the poor person. But if the person didn't partake of the qualities, they wouldn't be in it. So I mustn't be too understanding or too positive. So from sattva arises knowledge, from rajas arises greed, addiction to things, the outside things, or addiction to what it produces in us when we use them, such as alcohol, nicotine, sex. From tamas arises heedlessness, delusion, and ignorance. So they just walk madly on right into the swamp and they sink and they die. They don't even know they're dead because there isn't much difference. It's sad. There are people who walk through life asleep. Those established in sattva go upward. So if you want to rise, and you're pretty foolish if you don't, then you cultivate all that which is sattva. Number one, of course, number one is meditation and japa. Virtually number two is diet. You don't have a sattvic diet, you're getting nowhere. And three, sattvic association. And if you don't know any sattvic people, either move to where they are or just go stay all alone. I was just remembering this morning for some reason how in my little hometown there was this really, really nice house just about a block from the town square that I would always see going back and forth from my grandparents' place. And uh, there had been a doctor, a town doctor, that at his death, oh, he had lived in that house, and at his death, his wife never walked out the front or the back door. Never. We never saw her. She was never seen. There was a neighbor whose backyard adjoined hers who made a point, if she saw her at a window or something, to kind of wave and so on. And so they became friends. And she would go to her house and visit her. Of course, she never came out of her house. And so she had some contact, one person, and sometimes they called on, they talked to each other on the phone. But this woman had been invisible for years, before I was born, and never appeared, I guess, until if she had a public funeral when she died. So there she was, all stuck and isolated like that. But Tamas and Sattva can look alike. So there are Sattvic people who don't have much associations and Tamasic people who don't. It's their state of mind that will determine. So those who are established in Sattva go up. The Rajasic remain right in the middle. No different, never change, lifetime to life, same old stuff, same old routine, completely satisfied like a baby is with looking at his fingers, playing with his toes and sticking their toes in their mouth. So it is, again, with a story I've told where when Mark Twain went back as an old man to Hannibal, Missouri, and got off the train, and hundreds of people were there to meet him because he's famous. And his old friend came up with the ear trumpet, could hardly hear. And they'd done a lot of outrageous things together, so they had happy memories together. And the old man with the ear trumpet turned around, looked at everybody with contempt, turned back and said, "Just the same damn fools, Sam, just the same damn fools." Well, the Masic people are the same damn fools from life to life and live with the same damn fools from life to life. But if you go to a pigsty and they're going and they're rolling there and there's some slop, you don't say why you shouldn't be doing this. Well, of course, you don't say that. It's their nature. So understand, some people's nature is to be ignorant. Leave them alone. And they won't come home. That I can guarantee. So, when the beholder sees no doer other than the gunas, in other words, that is the thing, the character behind what I see, the character behind the actions I see people do or that I do. But when he notices, okay, there's the three gunas, and he believes in them, then he's obviously virtually already a sattvic person and will cultivate sattva. So this is the sattvic beholder. When he sees no doer other than the gunas and knows that which is higher than the gunas, which is beyond prakriti, is purusha, the spirit, he attains to my being. That is, he attains to establishment in the consciousness because inside we're as perfect as we ever will be, and we've been that from eternity. So we're not going to get to it. We're going to rise to a place where we can manifest it and actively be it. Okay? When an embodied being rises above these three gunas, which are the source of the body, freed from death, freed from birth, old age, and pain, he attains immortality. He also does not necessarily attain a good knowledge of time, because I have gone 15 minutes over the time. So, is this Rajasic or is it Tamasic? I leave it up to you. Namaste.